Bienvenidos, Ushamdeed, and welcome to another NetAcad Introduction to Python course supplemental video tutorial. In this video tutorial, we're going to be tackling probably one of the most complicated and most challenging labs to this point in the course, and that is going to be lab 4.1.3.8. So we're going to come up with the day of the year by writing our own functions. And what we're really doing here, and let's jump over to the activity itself, what we're really doing here is we've already created the isLeapYear or isYearLeap function and code in 4.1.3.6. We already created the days and month function and its code. Now, we're not going to be using isLeapYear, at least not in my code, we're not going to be using it. But we will be calling, right, or invoking this days in month in order to solve our problem. Now, this is the code we need to come up with, but this is also the very, very tricky part of this activity. Now, we've got this print statement here at the bottom where they're showing us that they are actually going to invoke that day of year. And what they're looking for, when I first saw this activity a while ago, I looked at it and I thought, please tell me they're not asking for the actual day, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And it's not. It's actually just looking for the day of the year. So like if it was January 31st, we would be at day 31. If it was February 1st, it would be day 32, February 2nd, day 33, so forth and so on. And what we're going to be taking into account is if we're in a leap year, and that's where we get into the days in month code. Remember that we had some code in here that was checking to see if it's a leap year. And if it is a leap year, it's returning 29 instead of 28. So instead of 365 days in the year, we would end up with 366. And so we're going to take our time going through this code because this is probably I said one of the most challenging activities we're going to do. It says 20 to 30 minutes. I think it took me originally when I did it close to 45 to an hour, sort of tweaking it and then trying to get it down to a consolidated, sort of concise bit of code. Now, the scenario, we're simply going to be writing and testing a function that takes 3 arguments. You can see the arguments, right? These are going to be the positional parameters when they come into the function. The year, the month, and the day. And this is the function invocation, right? That's the function call. So that's going to be the year argument, positional argument. That's the month positional argument, and that's the day positional argument. And so they've got it set with just this information here. We're going to change some of this. We're going to use that information initially, but then we're going to change it so that we can validate that the function's actually working. The program is doing what it's supposed to do. So it's going to return the corresponding day of the year. In other words, the number of whatever day of the year that is. So it could be anywhere from the first day of the year, so 1, all the way up to 365 in a non-leap year, but it could go up to 366 if it is a leap year, and you can see that that's kind of what they're walking us into right here, December 31st of 2000. And so from our previous activities, 4.1.3.7 and 4.1.3.6, we know that 2000 is one of those centurial leap years that we're going to be dealing with. So let's go ahead and see here. So if we get, it's going to return none if any of the arguments is invalid. So this code we're going to be able to reuse from 4.1.3.7 because we already took a look at how to invalidate if the month or the year is out of skew. Now the day we're going to actually have to incorporate, and we've already got that data queued up as to how many days are in each month. And it's in that list that we created in 4.1.3.7. So it says use the previously written and tested functions add some test cases to the code. So again, what I could do for test cases is just copy this line and then put in multiple other print statements with different data in there to see what we get. So let's go back over here to the Integrated Development Learning Environment, or IDLE, and here's where we're going to be putting our new code in. You can see I've already cut and pasted the code from is leap year. Now, we're not going to need that, right? What we are going to be, or I should say, we're not going to call that directly is what I should be saying. But remember, days in month is going to take a look and call is leap year. So when I say we're not using it, it's that I'm not calling it directly from this new function, day of year. So let's wipe this out here and let's tackle the first thing that they asked us to do. Oops, sorry, let's go back here. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so the first thing they asked us to do was if we get a bogus year, or we get a bogus month, or we get a bogus day. In other words, invalid data, data that we can't take in. And hold on just one second here. I want to pull this back and we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. And we have that code sort of right up in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to sort of grow this logical OR. So the year, we know that if the year is less than 1582, and then we're checking on the month value, right? So whatever year gets passed in, and actually let me drop an extra carriage return in there. So if the year is less than 1582, or if the month is less than 1, or the month is greater than 12, right? Because if it's less than 1, that doesn't work for us because we're treating January as 1, right? December is 12. If the year is less than 1582, that was before the Gregorian calendar, we have no way of determining the number of days because we've got leap years that didn't exist prior to 1582. And so we'll leave that code the way it is. So we've accounted for a bogus year. We've accounted for invalid month values that may come in, that we may get passed. Like if the value that got passed in was 13, right? That's going to be a problem. That's greater than 12. And we know that that's not going to work. Now, we can continue to grow this out because here's where we need to check on the days, right? In terms of whether or not the values that we have are going to be within range. So the first value is if the day is less than 1, right? So if the number of days is less than 1, we know that you can't have that in a month, right? It would have to have at least 1 day in there. So if the days are less than 1, or how do we check to see whether or not the days would be greater than any of the days, the total days in the months that we have listed up here, right? So again, we already have the number of days in the month here, and we're being passed in these values, year, month, and day. So what I could do is I could say, let's say, let's go is day, we want to say is the day greater than, and this is going to sort of stretch. I'm going to talk a quick second about whether or not we should leave this the way it is, or whether or not we should maybe do a second if statement. And I'll talk about PEP 8 as well. So we'll say days in month. So what do we pass to the days in month? Well, remember, inside of this function, right, we've got a year positional parameter, we've got a month positional parameter, and we have a day positional parameter. And I can determine the number of days that exist in the month, and we can even check to see if it is a leap year. When we go to do that calculation, if I pass in, let me give myself a little more real estate here. We're kind of stretching this out to the limits. So if I send in the year and the month, right, like that, what's going to happen here, and let me get my drawing tool out. So because I want to pause here because there's going to be a lot going on in this little function code. So right now, we only have one print statement. and it invokes or calls our brand new function day of year. And it passes in 3 positional arguments. It passes in a year value, it passes in a month value, and it passes in a day's value. And you can see here are the positional parameters as they get handed off to the function. So we've already checked for a valid year, right? We've already, and checking for the month is easy, right? It's either going to be the first month, the 12th month. If it's less than 1 or greater than 12, it's not a valid month. But it's down to the days now, right? Because for every month, we could have a different number of total days in that month. And especially, right, here's our call out to is leap year. And if it is a leap year and the month we're dealing with is February, we're going to return 29 back to the caller, right? Whoever called this function days and month. And so we know that if there's less than 1 day, right, that can't be a month, right? Because every month has at least 1 day. But now we're checking for the upper boundary. And what we're going to do here is we're going to call the days and month function, and we're passing in the values that the print statement ultimately sent in when it called days of year, and we have year, month, day. So we do have the year, it's 2000, and we have the month, which is 12. So we call days and month. The year is going to be 2000, and the month is 12. So it's going to run these checks. Right now, the checks are being run down here, but we're checking again here to make sure, is it a legit year? Is it a legit month? And most importantly, we're checking to see if it's a leap year, because that's going to throw the total number of days for the year off by 1 when it is a leap year. And what does this function return, right? Remember, we wrote this yesterday, and so we've got this list here. It's January, there's February, because by default, if not a leap year, February has 28 days. It's January, February, March, and then April, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way down to December. So we pass all of our checks. Now remember, the value for the month parameter is the integer 12. So if this is not true, right, which means we got good data here, right? So we're good there. So none of those are true. Else if, is it a leap year? Well, no, it's not a leap year, right? Because it's not a leap year and February is the key there. So this 2000 is a leap year, but it's not a leap year and it's not February. So we come down to the catch-all, right? Which is I'm going to return the number of days in month based off of month, which the value was 12 minus 1. And the reason that is critical is because of how Python with the lists does its indexing. Remember, the counting starts at 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 11, right? So you see that's how they're going to come back to me with the days in the month. This is giving me the index, and that's the value that we're going to return, is number of days in month, that list that we created with each of the number of days in each month. But we want the value for the, what would be 11th element, right? Not the 11th month, the 11th element in that list right there. And that 11th element is the number 31. And we're checking to see if the day is greater than the number of total days that exist in that month. That's this check here. So the checking the lower bound is easy, right? Because if there's less than 1 day, that can't be a month. No month has less than 1 day. But how do we check the upper bound? And in addition to that, how do we check the upper bound for what could possibly be data we're passing in when we call the function could be January, could be February, could be March. Well, we leverage this list that we've already created here, right? So again, I wanted to stop there and explain what I'm doing here, because the first time I tried to tackle this, I was thinking, well, I could sit there and do a whole bunch of if-elifs. But no, we've already got the number of days in each month in a list right up here. So let's check it that way. And again, we're going to be using this one more time to go back into the function and start to pull out these other values. And you're going to see how we do that, right? Because again, if I say it's December 31st, this is just a check to make sure that 31, which is the day value, is not greater than the number of days in the month of December. And we know that it's not. 31 is not strictly greater than 31. So that's that little section of code right there where we're checking to see if the days are less than 1 or they exceed the upper boundary for the days that would be in that month. Okay. And if that's the case, right? And so again, we're checking the year, we're checking the month, we're checking the day, and what are we going to do? If any of those are true, right? Because remember, if any one of those scenarios are true, the entire if statement is true, we return none, meaning you've got bogus data coming into the day of year function. It's invalid for one of any number of reasons. And so here's where trying to compact this all on one line may or may not be what you want to do. If you wanted to see, again, because right now it's going to return none. So actually, I don't have any of the other print statements. So let's put some bogus data in here. I'm going to put 33. I'm going to hit F5, and we're going to save this, and it's going to run. And so you can see it returns none. But my question to you is it returning none for this? Is it returning none for that? Where is it returning none? And so we don't know that, and we don't know why it's returning none. Because if the year is less than 1582, it's going to return none. But if the day exceeds the total number of days in that month, which that's the case here, and we know that, right? Because we've stopped right here. But again, this may be confusing. And so that's one aspect of, should we have individual if statements, or should we just pack it all on this line using these logical OR operators to check? Is it less than 1582? Is the month less than 1? Or is the month greater than 12? Or is the day less than 1? Or is the day greater than the maximum number of days in that month? Now, this is pretty concise, but again, we kind of run into a challenge where maybe I want to throw a print statement if I only wanted to do if the year is less than 1582. Then print, hey, that you entered a bogus year, please enter a year after 1582. Maybe that's what you want to have in there, right? If that's the case, then we would want to break this into some individual if clauses, right? Each of them returning none. And you can see, like, we're returning different values up here using if, elif, right? Same thing here. We've got to return none, 29 if it's a leap year and it's February. And so that's something to consider. Now, the other thing to consider is how many characters do you think we have on this line right here, right? So, and this is kind of easy to check. I'll copy this, and it's, whoa, did not want to do that because we just spent some considerable amount of time working on that. Let's leave the 33 in there. So let's copy this line right here. I'll say Control C. And if I come into VI, I'll just say VI junk.py, and we paste that in there. If I save it, you'll see that we've got 87 characters. And so this line is, that line is 87 characters long. And here's where PEP 8 comes into play. Now, if you're not familiar with the PEPs or what PEP stands for, it's Python Enhancement Proposal. And PEP 8 is probably the most important of the PEPs for beginners because it talks about things like your code layout, how you're going to do indentation, you using tab or using spaces, and we're interested in this right here. maximum line length. So for flowing long blocks of text with fewer structural restrictions, I'm going to be right here. Limit all lines to a maximum of 79 characters. So we come back over here and we would see that, well, maybe that's not exactly what we want. So here's what I'm going to do when we go to test the days, right? I can do this, and I'm going to throw a print statement in here that says either the year or the month is invalid. Invalid. Right? So I'm going to put that there, and then we're going to return none. And then I'm going to back this up, and we're going to say if, and now we're going to check the day by itself. So again, you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I want to get it less than 79 characters, right? Because that's good practice, best practice. But you could break it down into 3 ifs if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it here at 2 because I'm okay with this, right? Either the year or the month is invalid. And then here I could put in a print statement that might say the number of days in the month is invalid. Invalid. Put a couple exclamation marks in there, or an exclamation mark in there, and we'll leave it at that. Because this is going to give the user some better information. Let's hit F5. Let's run this, and let's see what we get over here. The number of the days in the month is invalid, right? And that's what we printed out right here, because 33 days does not have December, right? December does not have 33 days. And so, again, I wanted to slow roll this section in terms of the testing because this is also going to come back. We're going to look at this days and month. We're going to invoke that function again because we already have the values for all of these months, the number of days in all of those months. All right, so let's change that back to 31. And let me hit F5 and let's see what we get now. What are we going to get? We get none. Right? Because at this point, all this function is doing is returning none, right? So we're not actually getting anything back when we call day of year. There's no value that's going to come back to us, right? At this time, because we haven't specified it. All right, so that is the check for all of the valid data, to check to see whether all of the data is valid. And let me hit print a few times and let me give me some space here. All right, so let's come back up here and let's go there. All right, so we'll go right there. All right, so if all of the data has checked out, right, and the number of days is a valid number, then we can capture the number of days based off the value that was entered in here. And this keeps moving around on me. I apologize. So we can capture that. I'll give myself one more space. And I can say total number, and we'll just say total number days, right? So the total number of days, I'm going to assign whatever that value was that we got passed in. So right now it would be 31. If I was to print out total number of days, it would be 31. In fact, let me go ahead and print total number days. And let's hit F5 and then let's run this. And we should see 31. And again, what's the function returning? The function's still returning none. We haven't told it what to return yet, but we just staged what it's actually, and I should say, what it's actually going to return are the total number of days. So you can see that it returns the total number of days because we're assigning to it the day that got passed in. Now, important in this is we also know the month, right? So if it was December that got passed in, that month would be 12. It would come in as a value of 12. However, remember how we're indexed up here. When we make that call out to days in month, that is where, if we're returning the number of days in that month, we're going to be returning it minus 1. But down here, it's not so much that we're focusing on what the index value is. We want to remove that month, basically. We want to account for the fact that the month has already been counted. And so if I entered in December, right, which would have been my month value of 12, then that month is done. So I'm going to take 1 away from that, because then the next time I go up there to get a value, I'm going to go to the month before December. In other words, December minus 1. And so when we go now to call this days in month function again, we're going to be calling it, let's say it was December, is that what we're using here? We're going to be calling it, I can get rid of that print statement, with 11, right? But 11 is November based off the months, right? January 1, December 12, November 11. But where is the number of days for November as an index in that list? It's at index position 10. So that's why we're going to decrement the month, because we're accounting for that month, but we want to make sure that when we loop through here, which is what we're getting ready to do for each of the months, and I could probably pull back a few lines here, we're going to continue to decrement the months. So while the month is, we're going to say greater than 0. Yeah, while the month is greater than 0, right? Because we want to say while the month is greater than 0, because if it's 1, which means January, then when we decrement the month here, there's no need for me to go up into this list and try to pull things out, because if the month is January and I'm trying to count the total number of days in the year for the month of January somewhere, like the 15th or the 16th, I've already got that. I've validated it and I have the value right there, right? So we would decrement the month. It would be 0 at that point. And then there's no need to loop through all the other months. And that's usually the challenge for learners, is figuring out how to work through the list. And we're approaching it from decrementing it, right? For whatever the month that's entered in, we're going to work ourselves backwards through the months. So we say while month is greater than 0, the total number, what did I call it? Total number days, is that right? Total number of days is going to be, and so here's where we're now just going to iterate through, and again, working our way backwards in the list. If you think about it as working backwards in the list from whatever month is provided. So December is what we've got in here for the data that we're going to use initially, right? So then I'm going to decrement it. The index position is going to be 10, but the month would be 11. And then it's going to decrement again. And as we decrement, right, we're going to be calling that days in month function, because when we looked here by passing year and month, and very important, the positional parameters, right, that we're passing, we have to match, right? We have to pass 2. If I only passed up there the month, then we're going to get an error, right? I need to make sure I'm passing year and month. So every time I invoke this function while the number of months is greater than 0, I'm basically working my way backwards each month and adding the number of days in the month, right? And that's the index position. This isn't the number of days in the month here. That's the index position of where in that list the value is located for the month in question, right? So what does that look like? Well, it's going to look very similar to what we have right here. Let's clear the screen. Let's get control of the screen back. And so I'm going to say, not total number of days. Sorry, I already did that. Days, let's look up here. Days in month, and then again, year. And you can see, take a look at that. Idle knows if I hit tab, I'm sorry, not tab. I want to year, month. Let's type it in there. You can see that idle kind of helps you out. It's kind of telling you, hey, you need to put parameters in here for year and month. And so these are going to be the value. Now remember, the month value is being manipulated right here. It's being altered to account for the fact that if I entered in 12 for December, I need to decrement to get to November, and that would be 11. But when 11 is sent in as the month, remember what happens up here. We return, right, and we're saying it's a non-leap year and it's not February. We're returning the value of 11 minus 1 is the index, which is 10, which is 30. That's the value being returned. And that value is going to be added to the total number of days that I currently have already based on the day value that got passed in. Once it passes the check that it's a valid number of days for the month in question, right? And so that is how we're iterating through for each of the months. But once I add to the total number of days variable, I add the days for what would be the previous month, right? Because we're working ourselves backwards. I need to now, remember, we're in the while loop now. The while loop does not go back up here to decrement the month again, right? That decrementing of the month is what's going to dictate whether we come into the while loop. Once we're in the while loop, if I supplied 12 as the month, which would be December, then the month is going to get decremented. When we come in the first time, it's going to be 11. But we're not coming back up here to decrement it. I've got to handle it in the while loop. And so let's do that right here where we say, M-O-N-T-H, we decrement the month. And then we check again, while the month, so is the month still greater than 0? If it is, then we go out and we invoke and call the days and month function, and we pull out the number of days for that month out of that list, unless it's a leap year and it's the month of February. When that's the case, 29 is the value that's going to be returned that would be added to total number of days, and that would give us 366. In a leap year, we're going to have one more day. So now we're just about done here. Let me actually get rid of some of these, and we'll go here. So this is where, we're now going to back up one, because once this while loop has finished, that's where I'm going to come out and we're going to return. And what do we want to return here? We want to return total num days, right? And so then we're going to return the total number of days once this while loop has completed if we didn't enter in January. And if we did enter in January, we already have the total number of days because it's the first month. So it's either going to be 1 up to 31. And then that's the value that we would end up returning, right? And so let me look at this just a second here. I want to make sure that we've got everything where we need it to be. And let's run this and let's see what we get. Total, what did I say? Oh, number. I said total num days, number days. Sorry about that. So we'll say F5, right? Get the bonus lab, and there it is. 366 is what is returned. That's what we're printing when we call the function day of year and send in these 3 positional arguments, which are acted on as positional parameters. So now let's do some other print statements, right? So let's say day of year, and let's do a leap year, and let's do the second month, and we'll do the third month and the second day. So we'll do F5 again and say, oops, sorry, unexpected. What did I do there? I forgot to do my closing parents. I apologize. Let me get this up off the bottom of the screen, because when it's at the very bottom of the screen, sometimes it's a little difficult to see what's going on. So now let's hit F5 and let's rerun this again. And we get 366 and 62. So what if it is a non-leap year? So let's go ahead and say print day of year, and then we're going to put in here, we'll stay with 2000 for the leap year, and I'll put in 12 and then 31. And then let's hit F5 and run it again. Oops, sorry. I want to say, okay, it's going to be saved. We get 366. Sorry, I wanted to do a non-leap year so that we can see. Sorry about that. So let's take a look at the non-leap year count for December 31st. You can see we get 365 because 2001 is not a leap year. And so let's recap real quickly what we did here. So this is a viable solution, and it's pretty consolidated. Again, we can argue, I can't argue with the PEP, right? So 79 characters for a single line, that is definitely a good rule of thumb. So I'll break it into two if statements. We check for the bogus year, invalid year. We check for a bogus or invalid day that could be provided depending on how many days are in that month. And in that call, we also invoke the is year leap, because we're checking to see if the year is a leap year and is it February, because if it is, then the number of days in that month is going to be 29. So then we take that total number of days for that month, we decrement that month. We basically X out that month from what we're trying to aggregate or total up, which is the total number of days. And if the month that we provided was not January, right, which would have been 1, and then if we decrement 1 by 1, it's not going to be greater than 0. It's going to be 0, right? So then we have our answer. We know how many days. But if we entered in 5, then we come in here and we're just simply going to cycle through, iterate through, and call the days in month function repeatedly in order to get the number of days for the previous month, and then simply add that to the variable that we already have that has some days in it because we've entered in the values down here. This is what we're passing into these functions. And then we decrement the month, because once we get to January and we get that number of days and add it into our total number of days, it's going to decrement 1 to 0, and then that's it, we're done. And then we return the total number of days. And that's these values we see over here. And we can see that it's working for a leap year. And again, you can continue to add print statements in. So now what I want to show you is what you've done here up to this point is pretty incredible, right? We've created a Python module. And in this module, we have 3 functions. So right now, you could give this module to somebody and say, say, hey, I've got this module. We're going to call it, let's get out here to the command line. We're going to call it leap year. So let me cat out leapyear.py. So here's my module. Now you'll notice I've got this commented out because we don't want to run this as a script. We want someone to be able to import our module, right? So if I was to say Python 3 and I said import leap year, we now have in our namespace that module. This file has been imported, or I should say, the module has been imported into the namespace, and along with it, these functions, right? So if I was to say leap year dot day of year, and then provide in here 2000, is that month? Yeah, we'll say 12/31 and hit enter. I can now use the functions in this module that we've created and have other programs call that module. right? Or have other modules import that module and leverage it. And again, it's not just this single function. I can call and take a look at this. And this is what I love about, this is what I don't like about the integrated development learning environment, the interactive interpreter. But this is what I love about being on the Linux command line. I mean, I'm on a Mac, and yes, I'll leave the argument as to whether or not it's, if it's free BSD and how much of this is that. But with a Linux command line, I hit the tab button, the tab key twice, and it shows me, okay, you've got the day of year, you've got days and month is a function that you can call, and is leap year. So let's go ahead and say, okay, well, I want to do is leap year, and then let's see, what about 15? Well, actually not 1500. What about 1600? And it returns true, that was a leap year. What about 1700? False. And so you could have someone else import this module into their program, and they can simply call your functions at this point. So again, while it might seem really tedious that we've worked through this example, this is actually really, really good stuff. We've got 3 individual functions that stand on their own, or could stand on their own, but then we have day of year that uses days and month that then calls is leap year. So this is an absolutely fantastic activity. This set of 3 activities, some of the best activities in this course right here, 4, 1, 3, 6, 7, and 8. And so that is going to do it. That is our entire program. Again, this ran a little long, but there's a lot going on here. And it's really, really important to sort of understand the semantics and where the data is coming from, where are the positional arguments, where are the positional parameters, which functions are being called, when are they being called, and how do I get the data that may exist in those other functions? All right. Again, best of luck to you in your studies. I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you in the next video.